They say you should never look back. That the past is a place you learn from, not a place you live in. But sometimes, you have to go back. You have to walk through the fire one more time to understand how you survived the burns. My story isn't about the man I lost. It's not even about the dream we built, or the empire he kept. It's about what happens the day after the dream comes true. It's about the terrifying, deafening silence when the cheering stops. It's about discovering that the rock-solid foundation you spent your life building for someone else was actually yours all along. This is the story of how I learned that the anchor I was so desperately searching for was me. It began, as most of our generation's stories do, in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale coffee and ambition. Our life was a montage of hustle. Our big break, I'd whisper to him over a laptop glowing in the dark, is just one pitch deck away. And I believed it with every cell in my body. He was the visionary, the one with the ideas that could change the world. And I was the architect, the silent partner, the one who made sure the vision had a foundation to stand on. I see it so clearly now. Me, sitting on the floor surrounded by takeout containers, highlighting market research while he paced, spinning words into gold. Me, learning basic code from online tutorials at 3 a.m. because we couldn't afford a developer, and he was stretched too thin. The weekends were the first thing to go. While my friends were having brunches and going on weekend trips, I was in our designated office, a corner of the living room, making sure our server costs were paid, managing the budget, writing copy for the website. I was the chief everything officer of a company that didn't even have a business license yet. Every sacrifice was an investment, not just of money but of soul. I remember the day I decided to cash out my 401k. I was 28. It was the only real savings I had, a small nest egg my dad had helped me start when I got my first job out of college. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the bank for an hour, the withdrawal form shaking in my hand. It felt like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But then I thought of his face when he talked about the startup, the light in his eyes. This wasn't just his dream. It was ours. The promise wasn't just about money or success. It was about a life we would build together, a future free from the worries that haunted our parents. So I walked in, signed the paper, and never looked back. That seed money was more than cash. It was my faith, liquidated. For years, that was our rhythm, his spark, my fuel. I became an expert at things I never imagined. I could negotiate with vendors, write a press release, and calm him down from a full-blown panic attack over a minor bug in the beta version. I was the emotional ballast in his storm of creation. My own passions, my own career goals, were quietly packed away in a box and stored in the attic of my mind, labeled someday. Someday after we made it. Someday when we had time. Someday when he didn't need me so much. And then someday arrived. It was a Tuesday. The call came from the venture capital firm. Series A funding. Secured. I heard him shout from the other room, a raw, primal sound of victory. He ran into the kitchen, lifted me off the ground, and spun me around until the world was a dizzying, beautiful blur. "We did it!" he yelled, his voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it!" And in that moment, pressed against him, with the scent of champagne already seeming to fill the air, every single sacrifice felt validated. The missed birthdays, the sleepless nights, the cashed-out retirement fund, it was all worth it. We had made it. The celebration was euphoric. We were the toast of the town, or at least our small corner of the tech world. He gave a speech at the party, champagne flute in hand. He thanked the investors, his mentors, the team. He even thanked me, calling me his rock. I stood there, beaming, feeling like I was part of something monumental. That night, lying in bed, we talked about the future. The house with the view of the ocean, the trips we'd finally take, the freedom. It felt like the first page of the rest of our lives. But the future arrived differently than planned. The day after the party, the shift began. It wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was a subtle, tectonic drift. The funding didn't just bring money. It brought a new language, a new tribe. Suddenly, Our apartment was filled with VCs in expensive sneakers and tech bros who spoke in acronyms I didn't understand. Our conversations, once a dialogue, became his monologue. He'd come home, not to talk with me, but to talk three at me, recounting his day, his meetings, his brilliant insights. Our plans for the company became my vision for the next quarter. The first time he did it in public, it felt like a slap. We were at a dinner with a potential investor. I made a comment about our early marketing strategy, the one I had designed and executed myself from our kitchen table. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Oh, that was the early days," he said, waving a hand. "We're playing in a different league now. It's a bit more complex than she can grasp." He said it with a smile, as if it were an affectionate joke. But the table went quiet, and I felt myself shrink. I felt like a ghost at the table, a relic from a past he was quickly trying to erase. That phrase, "you just don't get it," became his new favorite refrain. He'd say it when I questioned a massive expenditure on a lavish office space we didn't need. He'd say it when I suggested we maintain the company culture we had worked so hard to build. He'd say it when I tried to talk about my own day, my own small victories at the part-time job I still kept. My life, my passions, were now quaint hobbies. My contributions were footnotes in his grand narrative. The 1,000 tiny betrayals hurt more than one big one ever could. It was the way he'd check his phone while I was talking, the way he stopped asking for my opinion, the way he introduced me at parties as my partner, with an emphasis that implied domestic, not business. I was being demoted in my own life. The home we lived in, once our sanctuary, started to feel like his showroom. A minimalist glass house with cold, clean lines and no room for my messy human emotions. The end didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, with the sterile glow of a computer screen. He was being interviewed for a popular tech podcast. I was listening in the car, proud of him, despite everything. The host asked him about the early days, about the struggle. And he told a story. A beautiful, compelling story about a lone genius, burning the midnight oil, fueled by nothing but ramen and a singular vision. He talked about the sacrifices made, the risks took. He never mentioned my name. He never mentioned the 401k. He never mentioned the woman who coded alongside him, who believed in him when no one else did. In the story he told the world, I didn't exist. I drove home in a daze. The beautiful house felt like a stranger's. He was on a call in his office, the door closed. I walked over to his laptop, left open on the kitchen island. An email was on the screen, a chain between him and his new COO. They were discussing a company profile for a magazine. The COO had written, "We should include a line about your partner's early support." And his reply, typed out just an hour before, was the final nail. "Let's keep the focus on the business. Her involvement was more personal than professional. It'll just complicate the narrative." Complicate the narrative? My life, my love, my sacrifice was a narrative complication. I wasn't a co-founder. I was a plot point he was editing out. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. In his mind, he had outgrown me. I was the starter girlfriend, the bootstrap phase partner. Now that he was funded, he was ready to upgrade. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, terrifying calm. I walked upstairs, packed a single bag, and walked out of the glass house I had helped build. Leaving wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. Staying meant letting the beautiful cage he had built crush me completely. The crash was brutal. It was a free fall in slow motion. The divorce was a clinical, soul-stripping process. His lawyers, sharp and condescending, painted me as a gold digger, conveniently ignoring the fact that my money had been the first gold in the mine. The home was sold. The assets were divided, but there's no legal column for dividing a shared history or an identity. And that was the biggest thing I lost. My identity. For a decade, my answer to "what do you do?" was "we're building a company." My entire sense of self was interwoven with his success. I was the supportive girlfriend, the partner behind the genius, the rock. Now I was just me. And I had no idea who that was. I moved into a small, sterile rental apartment on the other side of town. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was filled with the ghosts of my own questions. What did I do wrong? Wasn't I enough? Why did my love have an expiration date? Mutual friends took sides, and most chose his. He was the one with the success, the money, the exciting future. I was a reminder of a past he had shed. I'd see pictures on social media of people we once hosted for dinner, now clinking glasses on the deck of his new beach house. Each photo was a fresh stab of irrelevance. I sank. I let the grief wash over me like a tidal wave. I revisited the coffee shops where we'd sketched out our dreams on napkins, hoping to find a piece of the man I loved, but I only found pain. I spent days in bed, the curtains drawn, believing my value was inextricably linked to his success, and without him, I was worthless. I was a failed venture. A discarded prototype. My rock bottom wasn't a single, dramatic event. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had bought a cheap bookshelf from IKEA, a small attempt to make the sterile apartment feel like a home. I laid out all the pieces on the floor, the confusing, wordless instructions staring back at me. For hours, I struggled. I put pieces in backwards. I stripped a screw. I sat on the floor and sobbed. A raw, ugly cry of pure frustration. It wasn't about the bookshelf. It was about everything. I couldn't even do this one simple thing by myself. My first instinct was to call someone, to ask for help, to find an anchor. But there was no one to call. So I took a deep breath. I made a cup of tea. I sat back down on the floor, and I looked at those ridiculous diagrams again. I went slow, piece by piece, step by step, and 6 hours after I started, the bookshelf stood, a little wobbly, but upright. It was the ugliest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I had done it. By myself. It was a small, quiet victory, but it was mine. It was the first time in a long time I had felt a flicker of my own strength. That bookshelf was the beginning of the reboot. The turning point wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration. It was a series of small, deliberate choices. A few weeks later, I was in a therapy session, my first time ever seeking professional help. I was recounting the story, the same sad tale of being left behind. My therapist listened patiently, and then she asked a question that changed everything. She looked at me and said, "His venture was a success. So what's your next venture?" The question hung in the air. "Tits my tough venture." For 10 years, every ounce of my energy had been poured into his venture. The idea that my life could be its own startup, its own project, felt both terrifying and electrifying. It was like she had opened a door in a room I didn't even know existed. My life wasn't a shredded document. It was a blank page. That was the first line of new code. I started small. I found an old camera in a box, one I hadn't touched in years. I used to love photography, but I'd given it up. There was never time. I started taking it on walks, just shooting whatever caught my eye. The way the light hit a building, a crack in the pavement, the face of a stranger. I wasn't trying to be a great artist. I was just trying to see the world through my own eyes again, not as a backdrop to someone else's life. Then, I did something that scared me. I signed up for an advanced coding boot camp. I wanted to reclaim the skills I had only ever used in service of his dream. I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't just support. I was a creator in my own right. I was the oldest person in the class, surrounded by kids in their early 20s, with boundless energy. I felt like an imposter. But I showed up, every day. I struggled, I learned, and I slowly started to build things. Small, simple applications that did one thing well. They were my wobbly bookshelves, and I was immensely proud of them. I started reconnecting with the college friends I had drifted away from, the ones who knew me before I was one half of a power couple. They didn't see me as broken or left behind, they just saw me. They reminded me of the person I used to be, the one who was funny and adventurous and had opinions on things other than server uptime and user acquisition costs. Each step was a move away from the crash site. I took a solo road trip up the coast, something I'd always wanted to do. I ate at cheap diners, stayed in roadside motels, and watched the sunset over the Pacific by myself. And for the first time, being alone didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. I was the CEO, the founder, and the sole employee of my own life. And I was finally learning how to run the business. It's been 5 years since I walked out of that glass house. The woman narrating this story now is not the naive girl who cashed in her future for someone else's dream, nor is she the broken woman who wept over a flat-pack bookshelf. She is someone new, someone forged. I didn't become a tech billionaire. I didn't build a rival company to crush his. That's the story they tell in the movies. My success is quieter, but it's more profound. I run a small creative agency from a sunlit studio downtown. We help nonprofits and local businesses tell their stories. I get to use my skills, the writing, the strategy, the coding, to help people who are making a real difference in our community. It doesn't make headlines in the tech journals, but it fills my soul in a way Series A funding never could. I live in a small apartment filled with plants, books, and photos I've taken on my travels. It's messy and lived in and completely mine. I am surrounded by a small, solid group of friends who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I found love again too. A quiet, gentle love with a man who is a partner, not a project. He has his own dreams, and I have mine, and we walk alongside each other, supporting but never consuming. I look back on that time not with bitterness, but with a kind of clarity that only comes from surviving a fire. I understand now that the venture capital didn't change my ex-husband. It just amplified who he had been all along. His success gave him permission to become the person he always was, underneath the charming, ambitious dreamer. And his departure, as painful as it was, wasn't my end. It was my unsolicited seed funding. It was the brutal, necessary catalyst for my own venture, the founding of myself. The strength I have now wasn't a gift. It wasn't something I found. It was something I built. It was forged in the loneliness of that empty apartment, in the humiliation of the lawyer's office, in the quiet triumph of building that bookshelf. In the ashes of the life I thought I wanted, I didn't just find myself, I founded myself. True stability, I've learned, doesn't come from a person. It doesn't come from a job title or a number in a bank account. It's not an external structure you can lean on. It's an internal framework. It's the ability to get back up after you've been knocked down harder than you ever thought possible. It's the resilience to turn your deepest pain into your greatest purpose. It's understanding that the most important thing you will ever build is your own life, one choice, one day at a time. He got his company, his buyouts, his legacy. He thought he won. But he never understood the real deal. By cutting me out of his story, he gave me the freedom to write my own. By taking away the foundation I thought we were building, he forced me to dig my own, deeper and stronger than I ever imagined. The anchor I was always looking for outside, the stability I thought he was providing. The anchor was me. It always was. It's funny what you remember first. It's never the grand, cinematic moments. It's the small things. For me, it was the sound of his keyboard. It wasn't just typing. It was a rhythm, a frantic, percussive beat of creation. We met in the basement of the university library, in the 24-hour computer lab that always smelled faintly of stale pizza and desperation. It was 2 a.m. during finals week, a place where dreams went to either be born or die under the hum of fluorescent lights. I was fighting with a line of code for my senior project, ready to throw my laptop against the wall, and then I heard a voice next to me. "You're missing a semicolon." I looked up, and there he was. He wasn't classically handsome, not in the way you see in movies. His hair was a mess. He had dark circles under his eyes. But his eyes, they were electric. They weren't just looking at my screen. They were seeing the entire architecture of the problem. My first impression wasn't just that he was smart. Lots of people there were smart. It was that he was kind. He didn't just tell me the answer. He pulled up a chair, and for the next hour, he walked me through the logic, sketching out diagrams on a scrap of paper, making me feel like I had discovered the solution myself. He had this way of making you feel like the most brilliant person in the room. What drew me in wasn't his ambition, it was his generosity with it. He made his world, his ideas, feel like a place you were invited into, a place you could help build. Back then, he was all potential, a raw, uncut diamond. He was fueled by an unshakable belief that he could solve any problem if he just had enough time and a big enough whiteboard. He was the guy who would get so lost in an idea that he'd forget to eat, who saw patterns and possibilities in everything. But he wasn't arrogant. He was curious. He'd ask me about my passions, my projects, with the same intensity he applied to his own. He made me believe that my perspective, My skills were not just helpful, but essential. He made me feel seen. I remember one night, about 6 months after we started dating. We were on the roof of his rundown apartment building, sharing a cheap bottle of wine and looking out over the city lights. We were broke, we were exhausted, but we felt like we owned the world. He pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket and a pen. "I've been thinking," he said, and he started to draw boxes and arrows, the very first, primitive blueprint of the company. He sketched and talked for 10 minutes straight, his voice filled with a passion that was contagious. Then he stopped, looked at me, and his whole demeanor softened. He turned the napkin around and pushed it towards me. "This is just the skeleton," he said. "It's nothing without a heart, without a brain to make it work. That's you." He pointed to the sprawling city below us. "One day," he whispered, his voice full of awe, "we're going to build something that changes how all of those lights turn on." He handed me the pen. "What do you think we should do first?" In that moment, under the stars, with the city humming at our feet, I didn't just fall in love with a man. I fell in love with a future. Our future. The promise wasn't just in his words, it was in the way he handed me the pen. It was a promise of partnership, of a life we would build, side by side, from the ground up. He wasn't just offering me a role in his story, he was asking me to be his co-author. And I believed him. I believed in us with everything I had. The transition from dating to marriage wasn't a chapter break. It was the next logical line of code in the program we were writing together. There was no grand public proposal. Our life was too real, too immediate for that. It happened on a Tuesday, which was our designated date night, a sacred 2-hour window where we were supposed to shut the laptops and just be us. We rarely succeeded. That night, we were sitting on the floor of our living room, eating pizza out of the box, with financial projections spread out around us like a picnic blanket. He'd been quiet for a while, just staring at me. I thought he was stressed about the numbers. "We'll figure it out," I said, nudging a spreadsheet with my foot. "We always do." He just shook his head slowly, a small, tired smile on his face. He reached into his pocket, and for a wild second, my heart leaped, thinking of a velvet box, but he pulled out a key. A single, generic-looking house key. He held it out to me in the palm of his hand. "I don't have a ring," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "I spent our ring money on renewing the server subscription last month. But this key is for the house we're going to buy one day, the one with the big office for me, and the art studio for you. The one where we'll raise our kids and grow old. It's the key to the future we keep talking about. And I don't want to build any of it if you're not there to unlock the door with me. Will you marry me? Will you be my co-founder for life?" Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the pizza box. It was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. Because it wasn't a fantasy. It was a promise. Grounded in the reality of our life, in the sacrifices we were already making. It was a business plan for our hearts. I took the key, and it felt heavier and more precious than any diamond. Our first few years of marriage were a continuation of that night. They were a blur of hard work and deep, abiding love. We were a 2-person ecosystem. We lived and breathed the company. Our shared dream was the sun we orbited around. Our plans were simple. Get the company to profitability, buy that house, and then, finally, breathe. We'd talk about it late at night, our voices sleepy but full of hope. We'd take a real vacation, somewhere with no cell service. I would finally set up that art studio and start painting again. He would finally have the time to read for pleasure, not just for research. These weren't just dreams. They were milestones on our roadmap, rewards we promised ourselves for the work we were putting in. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was rich with happiness. It was in the small rituals. Me bringing him a cup of coffee at 2 a.m. when he was stuck on a problem, and him leaving a sticky note on the bathroom mirror in the morning saying, "You're the best part of my day." It was in the way we could communicate across a crowded room with just a look. We were a team, in the truest sense of the word. He was the engine, and I was the chassis, the framework that held it all together, directing the power and making sure we stayed on the road. I remember one night that felt like the absolute peak, the moment everything felt perfect and possible. It was about a year into our marriage. We had just landed our first real seed investment. It wasn't the big VC money that came later. It was a small check from an angel investor, Just enough to keep us going for 6 more months and hire our first employee. It was validation. It was proof that we weren't just two crazy kids with an idea. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. We went to our favorite all-night diner. The one with the cracked vinyl booths and the grumpy but kind waitress who knew our order by heart. We sat in our usual booth, the check sitting on the table between us like a holy relic. He couldn't stop looking at it. He reached across the table and took both of my hands in his. "Look at what you did," he said, his electric eyes shining even brighter under the diner's fluorescent lights. I started to correct him, to say what we did, but he squeezed my hands tighter. "No," he insisted. I'm just the guy with the crazy ideas. You're the one who makes them real. You're the one who built the first website, who wrote the business plan, who convinced me not to give up 100 times. None of this," he gestured to the check, "none of it happens without you. You are the foundation of all of this." In that moment, I felt so seen, so valued. All the sacrifices, all the late nights, all the quiet fears I held inside. He saw them all. He understood. We ordered milkshakes and fries, and we just sat there, talking for hours, not about work, but about us. About the first time we met, about our ridiculous wedding where my cousin caught the bouquet and his uncle got too drunk. We laughed until our sides hurt. He pulled me over to his side of the booth, and I rested my head on his shoulder, the smell of diner coffee and his familiar scent filling my senses. Outside, the city was asleep, but inside that little bubble of light, our future felt blindingly bright. It was a perfect, crystalline moment of pure partnership. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like we were invincible. Looking back, the change didn't happen overnight. It was more like the tide going out, so slow you don't notice the shoreline has moved, until you're standing on dry sand, wondering where the ocean went. The day after the funding party, the champagne buzz was gone, replaced by a different kind of electricity. A colder, more frantic energy. Our apartment, once our cozy war room, became his mission control. He was always on the phone, pacing, using a new vocabulary of acronyms, LTV, CAC, burn rate, that felt like a foreign language designed to exclude me. The "we" disappeared first. It started subtly. "We need to hire a new dev," became, "I need to hire a new dev." "What should our next move be?" became, "Here's what my next move is." I told myself it was just the pressure. That he was carrying the weight of this new, massive expectation, and I needed to be his rock, now more than ever. I made myself smaller, to give him more room to be big. The first real crack appeared at a dinner. It was at a ridiculously expensive restaurant with an investor, a man whose suit probably cost more than our first server. I was trying to engage, to be the charming, intelligent partner. The investor asked about our early growth strategy, and I smiled, remembering those nights at the kitchen table. It was all about grassroots. We focused on building a community first, creating content that... He cut me off with a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a warm sound. It was a gate slamming shut. "Oh, that was the Stone Age," he said, waving his hand dismissively as he took a sip of wine. Bless her heart, she was great at that stuff. But we're playing in a different league now. The metrics are a bit more complex than she can grasp. He said it with a smile, turning to me as if sharing an inside joke. But the investor didn't smile back. He just looked at his plate. In that moment, under the warm glow of the fancy restaurant lights, I had never felt colder. I felt my entire history with the company, my contributions, my all-nighters, shrink into a quaint, embarrassing hobby. I was no longer the architect. I was a decoration. I tried to talk to him about it that night. He was unbuttoning his shirt, already checking emails on his phone. "What was that tonight?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He glanced up, distracted. "What was what?" "The way you talked about me, about my work." He sighed, a deep, put-upon sound that instantly made me feel like I was the problem. "Babe, you're being too sensitive. It's business. You have to understand. These guys think on a different level. I have to speak their language. I was just managing the room." "By making me sound like an idiot?" He finally put his phone down and looked at me, but the kindness was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a weary impatience. "You just don't get it," he said, and there it was, the phrase that would become the anthem of our decline. "This isn't our little lemonade stand anymore. This is real. The pressure is immense. And frankly, I don't have the energy to manage your feelings on top of a multi-million-dollar company. He turned away, picking up his phone again. The conversation was over. He hadn't just dismissed my feelings. He had framed them as an inconvenient liability to his success. That was the justification for everything that followed. His cruelty was rebranded as focus. His arrogance was vision. His neglect was the, quote, price of success. The 1,000 tiny betrayals began to pile up. He made a massive, non-refundable deposit on a new, absurdly slick office space downtown, all glass and steel, without even telling me. When I questioned the expense, reminding him of our bootstrap principles, he just shook his head. We have to look the part. You wouldn't understand the optics. He stopped asking for my opinion, then he stopped listening when I gave it. I'd be telling him about my day, about a small victory at the part-time job I'd kept for security, and I'd see his eyes glaze over as his thumb scrolled endlessly on his phone. I was the ghost in our own home. He started introducing me at tech events as my partner, but the context had changed. The unspoken word was domestic. I was the woman who lived with him, not the woman who built with him. I was an accessory to his new life, and I was starting to clash with the decor. The end came not with a bang, but through a pair of earbuds. He was being interviewed for a major tech podcast, one we used to listen to together, dreaming of the day he'd be on it. I was driving, running errands. My life had become a series of his errands, and I put it on, a knot of pride still managing to form in my stomach. The host asked him the inevitable question. So take us back to the beginning, the garage days. What was it like being a solo founder, grinding it out? And he answered. He told a beautiful, heroic story. A story of a lone visionary, fueled by ramen noodles and an unbreakable will. He talked about the loneliness, the sacrifice, the immense personal risks took. He painted a masterpiece of the solitary male genius. He talked about cashing out time as savings. He never said my name. He never said we. He didn't just omit me. He wrote me out of existence. And in my place, he built a monument to himself. I pulled the car over, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't grip the steering wheel. The world outside my windshield seemed to warp and blur. It wasn't just a lie, it was a complete erasure. Every sacrifice, every line of code I wrote, every tear I shed, every dollar of my own future that I had gambled on him, it had all been fed into his PR machine and spun into a story that had no room for me. When I got home, the glass house felt alien, hostile. He was in his new home office, the door closed, his voice booming through the wood as he took another important call. His laptop was open on the kitchen island, a monument of cold, brushed metal. An email chain was on the screen. It was from his new COO, a woman he'd hired without ever introducing to me. I saw my name. I leaned closer. The COO had written, "Great podcast. For the Forbes profile, maybe we should add a line about your partner's early support for a human touch." I held my breath as I read his reply, typed less than an hour ago. The words felt like they were being carved into my skin. Let's keep the focus on the business. Her involvement was more personal than professional. It'll just complicate the narrative. Complicate the narrative. In 10 years, I had gone from co-author to a narrative complication. I wasn't a partner. I was a plot point to be edited out for clarity. He hadn't just built a company without me. He had rebuilt our past without me too. A strange calm washed over me. The grief and anger were so immense, they collapsed into a single point of clarity. There was nothing left to fight for. You can't fix a foundation that has been deliberately dynamited. I walked upstairs, past the photos of us, where we looked so young and full of hope. I took a single duffel bag from the closet and filled it with only the things that were mine before they were ours. My clothes. A few books. The old camera I hadn't touched in years. I walked down the floating glass staircase, my footsteps making no sound. I didn't leave a note. The email was the only note I needed. Walking out of that house, leaving the key on the cold marble counter, wasn't an act of rage. It was an act of survival. Staying meant agreeing to be a ghost. And I had finally decided I was real. I stood there, staring at the words on the screen. Complicate the narrative. It was so clean, so corporate. A clinical execution of a decade of my life. The air in the house grew thin. The minimalist silence suddenly felt suffocating. The anger I expected never came. Instead, a profound and terrifying clarity washed over me, cold and absolute. It was the clarity of a surgeon realizing the patient is already gone. There was nothing left to save. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I simply turned and walked up the floating glass staircase, my feet making no sound. Each step was a quiet renunciation. I passed the oversized, abstract painting we'd bought for the entryway, a piece I had loved, but which now looked like a chaotic splash of meaningless color. I walked past the open door to his office, hearing the muffled, confident tone of his voice as he closed another deal, built another piece of his world. A world that had no official job title for me. In our bedroom, I opened the walk-in closet. His side was a neat row of expensive shirts and tailored suits. My side felt like a stranger's. I pulled out a single duffel bag, the one I used to take on weekend trips with my college friends. I packed methodically, not with the frantic energy of escape, but with the deliberate focus of an archivist closing a collection. I took only what was mine before it was ours. A handful of worn t-shirts, my favorite pair of jeans, a few dog-eared novels. I found the old film camera I hadn't touched in years, tucked away in a drawer beneath cashmere sweaters I never wore. I held its cold, heavy weight in my hand. It felt more real than anything else in that house. Walking back down the stairs, I saw it on the marble island where he'd left it. The single, generic house key he had given me all those years ago, on our pizza box-strewn floor. The key to our future. The one he'd said he didn't want to use if I wasn't there to unlock the door with him. I picked it up. It felt weightless now. I placed it gently on the counter, next to the open laptop with its damning email chain. I didn't leave a note. The key was the note. It was the period at the end of a very long sentence. Then I walked out the door, closing it softly behind me, and never looked back. The first call came an hour later. I was sitting in a sterile beige hotel room I'd found on the other side of town. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 10 minutes after that. Then a text. "Where are you? Did you see the key?" Then another. "This isn't funny, call me." He wasn't worried. He was annoyed. My absence was an inconvenience, a disruption to his schedule. I finally answered on the fifth call. His voice was sharp, impatient. "What the hell is going on? Where are you?" I took a breath. The words came out quiet but steady. "I'm not coming back." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of him typing. He was multitasking my emotional crisis. "What do you mean, you're not coming back? Did something happen? Are you okay?" The questions were a formality. "I saw the email," I said. "The one to your COO. About me." The typing stopped. The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of a mind calculating, reformulating a narrative. "Look," he said, his voice shifting into a placating, condescending tone he used with difficult board members. "You're taking that out of context. You're being emotional. That was a business communication. It has nothing to do with us." "It has everything to do with us," I said, my voice finally cracking. "There is no us anymore. There's just your business. I want a divorce." I said the word. I let it hang in the air between our two separate rooms in our two separate worlds. He actually laughed. It was a short, incredulous puff of air. "A divorce? Are you serious? You're going to throw away everything we've built because of one stupid email? Because your feelings are hurt?" "We didn't build it," I whispered. "You did. You made that perfectly clear. I was just a personal complication." "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his patience gone. "You have no idea what it takes to run this thing, the pressure I'm under. I don't have time for this drama. Come home. We'll talk about it when you've calmed down." "No," I said, and it was the strongest I had felt in years. "There's nothing to talk about. I'll have my lawyer contact yours." I hung up the phone before he could respond, and in the silence of that anonymous hotel room, I began to sob. Not for the man he had become, but for the man I had lost so long ago, I hadn't even noticed he was gone. The weeks that followed were a free-fall. I moved from the hotel to a small, empty rental apartment that echoed with every footstep. The divorce was not amicable. It was a corporate takeover of a life. His lawyers were sharks in $1,000 suits. They moved to protect his primary asset, the company. And to do that, they had to prove that my contributions were worthless. The hardest day was the deposition. I sat at one end of a long, polished mahogany table in a soulless conference room. He sat at the other, flanked by two lawyers, looking at his phone. He never made eye contact. His lead counsel, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, began her questioning. "So," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "you were never formally an employee of the company, is that correct? You received no salary, held no official title." "I was a partner," I said, "a co-founder." She smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "But you had no equity agreement, no signed contract to that effect? Your name doesn't appear on the initial incorporation documents, does it?" "It was our life," I said, my voice shaking. "We didn't think we needed contracts." "I see," she said, making a note. "And this 401k you cashed out. Would you classify that as a business loan, for which you expected repayment with interest? Or was it more of a gift, a gesture, of personal support for your husband's dream?" Every question was a poisoned dart, designed to reframe my sacrifice as naivete, my love as a bad investment. They painted me as a scorned housewife trying to cash in, conveniently ignoring the fact that my money, my work, my belief had been the first cash in the register. I looked across the table at the man I had loved, the man whose dream I had funded with my own, and he just kept scrolling through his phone, completely detached, as if he were listening to a quarterly report about a failed marketing campaign. In that room, I wasn't a person. I was a liability to be minimized. I was a narrative to be complicated, and then dismissed. The day I signed the final papers was gray and rainy. I sat in my own lawyer's slightly less glamorous office, the thick stack of documents on the desk between us. This was it. The legal dissolution of a decade. The final edit of our story. My lawyer slid the signature page toward me and pointed to the line. "Right here," she said gently. I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy. My hand trembled as I looked at the black line where my name was supposed to go. A montage of our life flashed before my eyes. His electric smile in the library basement, the taste of cheap wine on a rooftop, the weight of that first key in my hand, the triumphant shout the day the funding came through. A tear fell onto the page, smudging the ink of the paragraph above my name. It was a paragraph that stated I had no claim, past, present, or future, to the company we had built on our living room floor. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost buckled me, but underneath it, something else was stirring, a tiny, quiet hum of relief. This was the end of the pain, the end of trying to be seen by a man who was determined to look past me, the end of shrinking myself to fit into his ever-expanding world. Signing this paper wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. It was terrifying. It was the loneliest I had ever felt. But it was mine. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I signed my name. The stroke of the pen felt like a severance, a final, clean cut. I had officially been written out of his story, and for the first time, I was free to start my own. The first few months after the divorce were a study in silence, the silence of waking up alone in a bed that felt too big, the silence of making a pot of coffee for one, the silence of an apartment that held no history, no memories, just the faint smell of new paint and the echo of my own footsteps. At first, the silence was an accusation. It screamed at me, listing all my failures, all my inadequacies. It replayed his voice, his lawyers' voices, telling me in 1,000 different ways that I was not enough. I was a ghost haunting the life I was supposed to be living. But slowly, something strange began to happen in that silence. It started to change shape. One evening, I stood in my kitchen, paralyzed by the simple question of what to make for dinner. For a decade, that decision had been a negotiation, a consideration of his preferences, his schedule. And in that moment of paralysis, a different thought bubbled up. I could eat whatever I wanted. I could have cereal for dinner. I could order the spicy Thai food he always said was too much. It was a ridiculously small thing, but it felt like a tectonic shift. It was the first time I realized that my life, in its entirety, was now a series of choices that were mine alone to make. The silence wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a blank page. Healing wasn't a lightning strike. It was the patient work of learning a new language, the language of myself. My therapist's question, "What's your next venture?" became my mantra. I treated my life like a startup in its seed stage. The first investment was in myself. I found that old camera and started walking through the city. Not with a destination in mind, but just to see. I took pictures of things that held no grand meaning. A pattern of rust on a fire escape, an old woman laughing on a park bench, the way light filtered through the leaves of a tree. I wasn't creating art for an audience. I was teaching myself how to see again, how to find beauty without a narrator telling me what was beautiful. Then came the coding boot camp. Walking in that first day felt like an act of defiance. I was a decade older than everyone else, a woman surrounded by boys who looked like they'd been born with a keyboard in their hands. I felt like a fraud, a relic from a dial-up era. But I showed up every day. I wrestled with lines of code that made my brain ache. And when I finally built my first, simple, working application, a little program to organize local volunteer opportunities, I cried, not from frustration, but from a profound sense of accomplishment. This code didn't belong to his vision, it wasn't fuel for his engine, it was mine. The logic, the structure, the solution, it came from my mind. I wasn't just the support system, I was the architect. Today, my life doesn't look like the one we sketched out on that rooftop. It's smaller and infinitely larger. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood with old brick buildings and a great coffee shop on the corner. The second bedroom isn't an office for a future tech mogul. It's my studio. It's messy, splattered with paint, filled with half-finished canvases and photos I've taken. The whole place is filled with plants and books, and the comfortable clutter of a life being lived, not curated. I run a small creative agency. We build websites and create branding strategies for nonprofits and local businesses, the kind of clients who can't afford a slick downtown firm but have missions that matter. My work doesn't get featured in Forbes, but I see its impact every day. I see it in the face of the woman who runs the animal shelter when we launch her new adoption site. I see it in the spike in donations for the Community Garden Project after we redesign their campaign. I'm not changing how the city's lights turn on, but I'm helping to keep a few important ones from going out. What's changed in me is fundamental. The woman who once cashed out her 401k for someone else's dream now meticulously manages her own retirement fund. The woman who was afraid to question a massive expense now negotiates 6-figure contracts with confidence. I learned that love isn't about sacrifice. It's about synergy. It's not about one person being the visionary and the other being the foundation. A true partnership is 2 people, each with their own foundation, choosing to build something together, side by side. Do I forgive him? That's a complicated question. I don't think I'll ever forgive the cruelty, the calculated erasure of my contribution and my worth, but I have forgiven the situation. I had to. Holding on to that bitterness was like drinking poison and waiting for him to die. Forgiveness for me was not about absolving him. It was about revoking his power over my story. It was about accepting that the man I loved and the man who left me were 2 different people, and I could grieve the first without being tethered to the second. His success is no longer a measure of my failure. It's just a fact, like the weather. It has nothing to do with me. My future is not a detailed roadmap anymore. It's an open landscape. And yes, I found love again. It didn't come in a storm of ambition and promises. It arrived quietly, like a sunrise. He's a landscape architect. He builds beautiful things with his hands. He has his own passions, his own history, his own strength. He doesn't need me to be his rock, and he doesn't try to be mine. We are simply 2 whole people who choose to walk together. He listens when I talk about my day, and he sees me, the woman I am now, not the potential of what I could do for him. I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is make another person the architect of your life, because when they leave, they take the blueprints with them. The life I have now, I built it myself, piece by wobbly piece. There were stripped screws and confusing instructions and moments I wanted to give up. But it stands. It's solid. It's mine. He got the company, the empire, the narrative he wanted. He thought he won the deal. But he never understood. By writing me out of his story, he gave me the greatest gift of all, a blank page. The freedom to become my own founder. The foundation I spent a decade building for him wasn't destroyed. It was just a rehearsal. The real foundation, the one that could never be taken away, the one that had been there all along. The anchor was me. It always was. If I could reach back through time, Back to that girl sitting on the floor surrounded by takeout containers, her face illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen. What would I say to her? I wouldn't tell her not to love him. I wouldn't tell her not to believe in the dream. Her heart was so pure, her belief so absolute. Her love was a force of nature. But I would kneel down beside her, gently take her hand and whisper, "Your name belongs on the incorporation papers too. Your dreams deserve their own line item in the budget. Love is not a merger where you liquidate your own assets and become a silent partner. A true partnership is when you build two separate, strong foundations and then decide to build a bridge between them, not a single skyscraper on one person's land." I'd tell her, "That 401k? That's the seed money for time to venture. Invest it in yourself first. Because your worth is not something to be gambled on someone else's potential. It is your own guaranteed return." And if you are listening to this right now, if my story sounds like a page torn from your own diary, if you feel like a ghost in your own home, if your contributions have been relegated to a footnote, if you are being told that your feelings are a narrative complication, please, listen to me. Your capacity to love, to support, to build, is not a weakness, it is your superpower. You just invested it in the wrong company. And when that company fails you, when it gets acquired, and you are written off as a redundant asset, the pain feels like it will end you. But it won't. This crash is not your bankruptcy, it is your market correction. This heartbreak is not your end, it is your unsolicited seed funding. The universe has just handed you a brutal, painful, but priceless opportunity to pivot. To start your own venture. The venture of you. Your next chapter is not about building a rival empire or proving them wrong. That is their definition of success. Your success will be quieter and far more profound. It will be the quiet triumph of rediscovering your own voice. It will be in the joy of making a decision that is purely for you. It will be in the strength you find not by leaning on someone else, but by learning to stand unshakably on your own 2 feet. The process is not glamorous. It's the hard, unsexy work of rebuilding. It's assembling the bookshelf. It's taking the online class. It's making the lonely cup of coffee and learning to enjoy your own company. It's one small, deliberate choice at a time. But every choice is a brick, and every brick is laying a new foundation, a foundation that no one can ever take from you. Your value was never tied to their success. It was never determined by their validation or their name. It is your core, non-negotiable equity. You are not a supporting character. You are the protagonist. You are the founder, the CEO, and the sole shareholder of your own life. Stop giving away control. It's time to call a board meeting with yourself and stage a friendly takeover. The stability you're looking for, the safety you crave, it's not in another person's arms. It's not in a shared bank account or a house with a view. It's in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that if the world burns down around you, you have the strength, the skill, and the will to build it back up again, exactly as you see fit. The anchor was never him. It was never the company. The anchor was you. It always was.